The channel Lazaris, a strong influence in my youth and a reference point that I often think of throughout my life, talks about reality being a nightmare or a dream or even worse, a mediocrity. And that hierarchy aside, the idea that a nightmare might be better than a mediocrity, Lazaris's focus is on, a beautiful world, having the dream. You can have it all. You create your own reality, etc., etc. And I want to explore the geometry of the middle life, that in fact the statistical probability is that the vast majority of lives will have some sense of balance that is 50% good and 50% bad. Certainly in my own life, I would say that my life is 50% good, 50% bad, and the higher degree of pain than well-being, which is something that I've noticed and worked with, I think comes not because there's more negativity in life than there is things that I enjoy, but rather that the reptilian brain, with its survival focus, concentrates on threats at a 5-to-1 ratio of positivity. So the formula goes something like this. The more traumatized you are in a traumatically illiterate culture, right, equals the more unresolved trauma you will have, right? The more unresolved trauma you have equals the more reptilian brain activity. The more reptilian brain activity, that's the fear-oriented operating system of fight, flight, freeze, the more focus there is on what could go wrong, with a bias that ignores the many wonderful and okay things happening. And we can see that in the scenario of an idyllic picnic in a beautiful landscape with delicious food and a lovely babbling brook and just literally good weather, nice friends. Everything is optimal in this picnic, and you're wading through the little stream, and in less than 1% of your peripheral vision, right? You're taking in miles of landscape, but there's this tiny little wriggling shape on the left in the water, and the whole body goes into fight, flight, freeze, in case it's a snake. Now, it might not be a snake. It could be a worm, it could be a leaf moving in the area, could even be a twig, moving through the water, might not be a snake. If it is a snake, odds are high it's not going to be poisonous, right? So it might not be poisonous. And even if it is poisonous, the odds are quite high that if you stand perfectly still, it will not swim over and bite you. It will avoid you and go on down the river. So it might not be a snake. It's only 1% of your peripheral vision. It might not be poisonous. And even if it is, it might not bite you. In fact, the odds are high that it wouldn't. And yet, all the flowers are forgotten. All of the picnic, the last joke, all out the window. We could say that in this scenario, that the reptilian brain is prioritizing negativity, fear, death, at 1,000 to 1 ratio. Because certainly in the miles around of countryside and the beautiful wildflower meadow around, you've got thousands of square feet. And there's lots of different dimensions going on. There's the emotional dimension, the mental dimension, the spiritual dimension. You've got different people to focus on, and the snake's only potentially threatening one person. You know, we're at least 1,000 to 1 in terms of all the good stuff going on, and yet, right, the priority, the zero in is to the negative, right? And so, and that is amplified with unresolved trauma. And in a traumatically illiterate culture, it is a culture that has the talent, the competency to traumatize a large number of its members, but not to diagnose the trauma, not to heal the trauma, not to release the charges in the body, right? As a result, you have highly reactive, highly charged people, right, that are disproportionately exaggerating the negative. But, you know, negativity out of a survival bias is usually amplified at least 5 to 1, right? So if half of the time things work okay, and half of the time they're disappointing, painful, etc., to the degree that we're operating using the reptilian operating system of fight, flight, and freeze, there will be an experience of 5 to 1 negativity. Now, my sense in my own life is that 60% of what I do or have done is fear-based, meaning that there's always fear present to some degree or other, but that it works out to be about 60% of the drive, and that's the reptilian operating system. And you know, as long as we have high levels of trauma on the planet throughout the species, there will be high levels of reptilian brain activity, and the only emotion that is available to the reptilian brain is fear of pain, fear of the unknown that could lead to pain, fear of being out of control that could lead to the unknown that could lead to pain, right? All fear is fear of pain, right? The fear of pain, fear of death that could lead to the unknown that could be painful, right? Fear of pain that could lead to death, right? All fear is fear of pain, and the greatest of those fears is the fear of the unknown, because that could lead to an unimaginable amount of pain and uncontrollable. When you're dealing with the unknown, right, it's bigger than we can imagine in both directions, right? And so you can see the negative bias in that. The greatest human fear on the planet today is of the unknown, and yet the unknown is neutral. The unknown has infinitely horrible things that can happen. That's half of the unknown. And infinitely wonderful things that can happen. So a neutral attitude to the unknown would be the rational one, right? I've got an unknown. Half the time it's going to be better than what is, and half the time it's going to be worse, right? But when we've been severely traumatized in a traumatically illiterate culture, where we know how to induce the trauma, but we don't know how to heal the trauma, the best we can do is develop coping strategies to manage the terror, the overwhelm, the pain of that unresolved trauma. And one of the drivers for anyone who has PTSD, who has been traumatized and has been helplessly in pain, one of the greatest drivers is I never want to feel that way again. I never want to feel this way again. And that fundamental choice based on the dominant drive of fear leads to a relationship of terror of the unknown, because half of the things in the unknown are worse than the status quo, and half of the things in the unknown are better, right? So it's a roll of the dice when you go into the unknown. But if your primary agenda is never to feel that way again, the unknown represents an enormous risk, right? And so it is viewed as the enemy, not a gatekeeper to all kinds of wonderful things that could be substantially better than what is. Right? So Lazaris paints a narrative that is up, right? You can create any success you want, and you can have it have the consequences you want. Now, my view geometrically is that reality will statistically be neutral, right? Reality is a possibility field, a probability field, and an actuality, right? And we're in the center. And because the possibility field is spherical, the probability field is spherical as well, right? The possibility field is the largest imaginable idea or object. It is the biggest part of reality, our reality. The possibility field is the biggest part of our reality, and it radiates out from each moment symmetrically in all directions, right? Right? The finger can move in all directions. Temperature can move in all directions, right? Sound up and down, right? Any continuum in the possibility field starting with a status quo can move out in all directions as a possibility, right? That means things can always be worse than they are, and they can always be better than they are. Now that leads to an important aspect of the subjectivity of good and bad, right and wrong, pain and pleasure, right? These are continuums, good and bad, right and wrong, right? Pain and pleasure. They're not fixed points. They're infinite continuums. No matter how good your life is, it can be infinitely better. No matter how bad your life is, it can be infinitely worse. Right? Your best day is somebody else's worst day, and your worst day is somebody else's best day. Right? You think of, you drove over a nail on the way to work and you had to get out and place the tire. Then the boss was angry at you because you're late for an important meeting, and you had dirt on your suit because you're changing the tire, and then it started to rain, right? Everything's terrible, right? And then the client picked the other advertising agency, and then it's just sickening, right? And you want to commiserate when you get home, and then your wife complains to you because this is just fucking horrible day. It's terrible, right? And that's your worst day in, whatever, maybe that year. But that's somebody's to be dreamed of best day. To have a car that could get a flat tire? Oh, wow. It's not even probable for me. But if I could only have a car, let alone that car, if I could only wear a suit, sure, I'd have to change tires and get to, right? If I could only be in America, right? If I could only get a job, right? I've got dementia, I've got this, if I could only have a job, this would be heaven. You're married? You have a wife that will put up with you even when you have a bad day? You didn't do those chores and she didn't leave you? Wow, that is incredible, right? You've got a boss and you didn't get fired, right? They ticked you off. Wow. See, because I'm fired. I don't have a car. I don't have a wife. I'm greasy all the time. I don't have a house, right? Your worst day is a hoped-for best day for somebody else, right? But then your best day, whatever that is a terrible, terrible day, right? You only made $10 million that year? That's the worst we've ever done, right? You know, you have a bitching wife that gives you nagging. That bullshit, right? Do this and this and this. You know, you're still working at a corporation. Oh, it's terrible. It doesn't matter where you're on the continuum. It can be infinitely better and it can be infinitely worse. So is what's going on good or is it bad? Right? Well, that is relative to your trajectory. That's relative to the status quo, right? And to that point about the unknown, every time, you know, and so really, it's a good day if it's a little bit better than yesterday. You're well paid if you get paid a little bit more than your peers. Interesting study, finds that someone making $2 an hour, surrounded by peers making $1 an hour, is very satisfied with their salary. Whereas someone making $1 million, right, is furious if most of their peers are making $2 million and they're being somehow left out or signaled that this is not, you know. So that's relative too, right? If you're making progress and relative to your norms, then you have a great life in your eyes, right? The more you are traumatized, regardless of what's going on, the more you are looking through the lens of fear and pain, and that's not a very enjoyable life, right? But wherever you are, right, you're making progress at 5%, 10%, 20% a year. One of the big inhibitors, right, for a traumatized culture is, in order to make progress, in order to grow, we have to change. And every single time we change any variable in our protocol of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, we are in such a complex ecology, socially, financially, legally, health-wise. You know, back in Europe, in the 15th century, people were dying because they weren't alcoholics. The people who were drinking beer weren't dying. The people drinking the water, right, with the bacteria in the undistilled, unboiled water, they were dying, right? Another friend lost his friends when he stopped smoking cigars, right? We are in such a complex ecology that any time we change, right? So today we'd think, oh, well, we got to cut down on alcohol, right? It's always good to drink more water and less alcohol. Except if there's a plague going on, except if there's rampant disease going on and the alcohol is safe to drink. It's bad on the liver, but it's not as bad as catching the virus, right? And so in a complex ecology, every single thing we change has unforeseen consequences, which is another way of saying that every single time we grow, we have to change. And every time we change, the world changes. And we cannot predict the full outcome of the change, which means that we expose ourselves to the unknown, which is 50% negative, 50% positive, every single time we make a change, right? And so we feel bad, we feel unsatisfied, we feel terrible, we feel pain when we're staying the same and the world is growing, or when we're regressing, when we're moving backwards. And yet the only way to grow and to keep up with the ever-changing pace of reality is to risk continual exposure to the unknown, which means to go head-to-head with our deepest root commitment never to feel that way again, right? Because the most intense feelings, the most intense drives in a traumatized culture are fear of pain. Right? There's right. People are not traumatized by bliss and love, right? They're traumatized by intense, uncontrollable, painful energy that they lack the skill and ability to integrate. So if the possibility field is neutral, right, as a default, the probability field would be neutral as well. Right? Should be as many ways for things to go bad as to go good. And at some level, on an actuality field, right, if we look at reality, half of it would be substandard, painful, bad, going backwards, not hitting the mark. Half of it would be a sin, which in its original origin means you take aim at a bullseye, right? And if you miss, you sin, right? It's bad because that bullseye is your family's meal. And if you miss the mark, God doesn't punish you, but reality does. If you miss the mark and you and your family go hungry, right, it is a sin, right? But, there's always that perfect center, right? You can even getting to the middle of space, right? You can always cut it in half. So wherever we are, it could be much better. Wherever we are is one person's worst day and one person's best day, right? And so I think the statistical expectation, the probability, should be what is. The probability is that half of life will be negative, disappointing, not as much as I'd hoped for. I ran the 4-minute mile, but I was trying to beat it. Last week, I beat it by 2 seconds. This time, 4 minutes and 1 mile. Well, that's very fast. Yeah, but last week I did better, right? So if we expect, right, if we expect that every action has a positive side and a negative side, right, has positive consequences and negative consequences, right? If we expect that every point on any continuum we are on is a step forward, if we were worse off the week before, and it's a step backward if we were better off the week before, then I think it's certainly rational, practical, and conforms to what is to say that reality will be 50% good and 50% bad, that there will be a price for everything that varies, right? There will be horrible prices and there'll be good prices, right? But, that vary. And that there will also be an interesting dynamic of cycles. Reality tends to be spherical, and so it has orbits, it has cycles. Dewey wrote a beautiful book on the study of cycles and noticed that if you mathematically slice any number of things, whether it's the rotation of the sun, whether it's the price of pork bellies in the futures market, whether it's the auto trade, when the most cars get sold and when the least cars get sold every year, right? Whether it's the migration of birds, whether it's the inhale or the exhale, that everything has a cycle, right? And a cycle is really a circle, right? We think of it on the straight line because, well, that's also part of a long cycle, right? You have the cycle of more lineality and you have the cycle towards more circular, right, thinking, right? Well, we're part of the cycle towards lineality right now. So right now the circle looks like a straight line through the eyes of our cult, right? But there have been and will be times again when the straight line opens up into a circle again, right? Is reality a wave or is it a particle, right? It partly depends. There's a cycle of observation, and that cycle correlates with reality itself, right? So we have cycles, and one of the interesting things that are on a cycle is pain and pleasure, right? So we could see that pain is down here and pleasure is up here, right? And, we think of taking out the garbage, that's painful. So it starts out in pain, but it ends up pleasurable when we don't have garbage in the house, right? Then we move towards pleasure. We don't take out the garbage until it piles up. Then it gets painful again. We take it out, and then it's pleasurable again when we don't have the garbage, right? We save a little money on a $6 latte and put it in our retirement account. And after a while, that pain turns into pleasure, right? And that pleasure, right, turns back into pain as we spend the money eventually, right? So, right, I could have another bit of cake and it would be pleasurable right now, but next week when I have to carry that weight, not so much. So there's a tension in many areas of reality between short-term gratification and long-term gratification. One study watched children and said, here's a cookie, if you don't eat it, I'll give you 2 cookies later, right? And they came back in an hour. And the kids that hadn't eaten the cookie, they gave them 2 cookies. And the kid that ate the cookie just got the cookie, right? And then later looking in the study of those people's lives, the people that waited, that had delayed gratification, which is pain in the moment and more pleasure in the future, right? The delayed gratification led to retirement funds, long-term thinking, and living more successful lives. Right? You have a kernel of corn. You can eat it and grind it into cornmeal, or you can plant it, wait a year, and let it grow into 1,000 kernels of corn. Right? And so you have a relationship. The more short-term pain you endure, the more long-term pleasure you experience. Right? And the more short-term pleasure you focus on, the more long-term pain. Do you want to go to school or do you want to watch YouTube? Well, I want to watch YouTube, right? But then you don't get a degree, then you don't get this, right? You don't learn how to think, you don't this. Do you want to eat candy or do you want to go for a run? I want to eat candy, right? Well, after a while, 300 pounds, out of shape, high medical bills, nobody wants to date you, right? Short-term pleasure, long-term pain, right? Long-term pleasure, short-term pain. And if that relationship between pleasure now and pleasure later, right? Because what we're really saying is that pain and pleasure are the same thing for two reasons. One, if you've got 3 toothaches and then you go down to 1 toothache, that is pleasurable. Wow. Wow. Heaven. Right? If I only could dream of having only 1 toothache. If you've got no toothaches and you go to 1 toothache, it's unbearable, right? But by the time you've got 3 toothaches, right? Well, 1 toothache, that was heaven, right? So pain and pleasure are the same, just depends on where you are on the continuum. Pain and pleasure are the same, it just depends where you are on the cycle. Do you want to confront your partner for all the delusions and gambling addiction they have? I don't want to do that, right? I'd rather watch TV and pretend nothing's going on. That's short-term pleasure. The long-term pain is we lost the house, right? There's no retirement fund. Right? They lost their job. We're homeless, right? But, right, we avoided the short-term pain. So really what you could say, right? Really what you could say is that the best life can be is you have some short-term pleasure pain cycles, and you have some medium-term pleasure pain cycles, and you have some long-term pleasure pain cycles. And if you do those well, right, if you plant some seeds that are going to be germinating immediately. I get up, I get a glass of water. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want a glass. I didn't want to pour the thing. I wanted the water, right? But if I get up, pain, take the glass, pleasure, there's an immediate feedback loop there, right? Now, some things have a very long time frame. Now, you could say that to the degree that you have a long-term vision, that certain pains will make sense or not make sense. Right? Meaning, if you want to leave a timber farm to your kids or your grandkids, if your goal is to leave your grandkids a timber farm, and you can plant 1,000 trees a month doing your exercise and, planting the cleared acreage, the family ranch or whatever. Well, if you've got vision for 60 years in the future, this is a pain that is worth paying. I don't want to have to, I'd like to go on a vacation, but I want to buy these trees. What's it going to be? Well, if you've got a 20-year vision, you're not going to do the trees because you're going to say, I'm never going to be around when these trees are going to be there, and I can't even think about grandkids. I mean, what about me? Why am I wasting my life planting trees? right? So if you're fortunate enough to live in a tribe that thinks about how each action today affects 7 generations into the future, you have the ability to do things today that are painful, that are uncomfortable, that expend energy. Lazaris says that that which is created destroys its creator. Right? So everything you create, right, according to that line of thinking, is destroying a little bit of you. Why would you destroy a little bit of you now that you can't even imagine when the benefit will come? Right? But a tribe that's thinking 7 generations in the future, they might start rerouting a river to form a reservoir that will take 100 years to complete. And they may say, I'll donate 1 month of my life for the tribal reservoir that's going to be available 7 generations in the future. And if each person donates a month, our 7th generation children will have a fishing, will have an agriculture that we can only dream of, and our tribe will prosper. Now, if you can imagine 7 generations ahead, you've got pleasure in the pain. Right? If you're imagining your retirement at age 30, every time you don't take a $6 latte, that's a long way away when you're 18 years old. 30? Am I going to live that long? Right? Many Americans don't think they're going to live to see the age of 30. So why would you wear a condom? Why not play around with drugs without any known origin, right? Harry ate one. It's blue. What does it really matter if, I could die, but, not missing all that much. When you can see the future clearly, when every seed of corn you plant, and can picture 1,000 kernels of corn, right, from 6 ears, right? Then there's pleasure in the pain, right? And similarly, when you enjoy a pleasure and you reflect on the lattes that you set aside to invest, there's appreciation for the pain in the pleasure. A lot of sweatshop women worked in a lot of factories so that this hat could be this cheap. Right? Before that, women fought to be able to have the vote. Right? There's a lot of pain in this pleasure. I click buy now. That's pleasurable. It's painful to the bank account. It's pleasurable to arrive in 2 days free shipping. Right? But there's pain within every pleasure, and there's pleasure within every pain. If you see the cycle, if you understand the cycle. And there are cycles that take 5 minutes. There are cycles that take 5 hours. There are cycles that take 5 days. There are cycles that take 5 years. There are cycles that take 5,000, 5 million, 5 billion years. Right? If you see further enough out and you understand each point of the cycle, meaning if you can visualize the cycle of breath, as you are breathing in, you are enabling and preparing to breathe out. The breathing in is necessary to breathe out. The receiving is necessary to give. If you understand the giving and receiving cycle of energy, as you receive, you can enjoy the act of giving. And as you give, you can enjoy the act of receiving. As you breathe in, you can anticipate and enjoy the exhale, which would not be possible, right? Reality is spherical, and it's always in motion, right? And so the unpopular thing today in the cycle of popularity will be the most popular thing a bit later. And the most popular thing will become the most hated thing. And the cycle of how fast that happens is determined by how fast the culture is moving, how fast the individual is moving, right? But it must move. And when you understand that reality is spherical, you understand that you can't stop one part of the cycle without stopping all of it. I have this thing that I hate and do not accept, but it is part of reality, okay? So it's fine, I hate it, it's going up here, it's coming along here, it's coming down here, but it's gonna hit the road now, right? It's gonna make contact with it's gonna enter the present moment. I can't accept this. So you have to put the brakes on. But now you stop. The bicycle stops. Both wheels stop. And I cannot move forward. I cannot accept this. Well, then you can back up, right? One revolution and back up to here, but it's going to make contact again. I just cannot accept someone thinking this. Okay, right? But that is one of the thoughts on the cycle. That is one of the thoughts on the circle. That shadow piece in you must make daylight, must surface at one point in the cycle. And if you won't deal with it, the entire thing has to be shut down. Now you can commit suicide. You had people threatening to leave the country if Trump was elected. If this happens, I'm leaving. I'm renouncing my citizenship. Right? I will not go on with my life in this thing if that happens. I don't accept it. Right? Right? So you leave the country. Right? But if you're paying attention, you will suddenly notice that the same lies and corruption are happening over there, right? There are corrupt politicians in other parts of the world. My goodness, right? Happening over there. Those people voted for that corrupt politician, right? So you leave country again. Right? But if there are no more countries to leave, you can cut your throat, right? I refuse to live in a world where this happens. Okay, you cut your throat. And then what? Right? Do you refuse to live in a universe where you get reincarnated? Right? And how can you expand through something? How can you expand through something if you do not accept it, if you do not love it? Right? If you're at the center, getting bigger, which means you have to accept and love more and more of what is, and you get to this and you say, no, I'm not accepting and loving that. Okay? Right? But that means you're not accepting and loving all the other points that are part of expanding through that. If there's one point here that I refuse to accept and we expand in a circular direction, we're stuck forever here, controlled in our presence, in our reality by this thing, until we can expand to love and accept that unforgivable, unlovable thing, as well as all the other things that are encompassed when the circle and the circumference of the circle of our I that we identify with, that we attach ourselves to and say, this is me, right? As we expand, more and more of reality is within the boundary that we call I or we, right? But that expansion happens in a circular direction, right? It doesn't expand, right? You don't get to feel more love without feeling more fear. Now, this is useful to understand, in geometry as well, just the understanding of like, how is it that loving someone more correlates with fearing the loss of that love more? How does that work, right? Well, what does it mean to love? If you love something totally, if you adore it, you admire it, you respect it, you support it, you champion it, you worship it, you love it, you're enthused, filled with God around it. Wow, it's just, you are such an incredible person, and oh my goodness, wow, everything about you I love. And of course, you're unique. There's nothing else just like it, right? So if you're in that state and it disappears, right? The object disappears. Well, what also disappears, right? The passion, the embodiment, the enthusiasm for the folk. How can you dance? How can you do your part of being totally in love with something that isn't there anymore? They're dead. They left. They said, no, thank you, right? How can you do that dance how can you dance without a partner? So what has to die? The part of you that's most filled with God, the enthusiasm, the devotion, the admiration, right? So you die. It's fun to love, it's fun to be devoted, it's fun to respect, it's fun to admire, it's fun to support, it's fun to give. But if you bring the Christmas presents to an empty coffin, right, and they don't even open it, and there's no smile, it's like, how can you play, how can you be the one you love being the most if the person you love the most isn't there, right? Well, pain is the gap between what we love the most and where we are. If what we love the most is right here, there's no pain. There can be fear of pain, because in cycles, all things change. All things are born, all things die. Right? Every thought, every belief system, every identity, it has a cycle of birth and death. Right? So the more attached to something we are, the more painful it is when that pattern dissolves. So what's the easy way, right? Well, if I have someone I really don't care about, and then when they come and go, I don't really care that much about it. My fear is rather low. We have a few fucks every now and again. We come, we go. They're okay. I'm okay. It's fine. Well, they're dead. Well, easy come, easy go, right? But the most amazing person I've ever met, the one in a billion, right? Person I love loving the most, Now the fear of death is real, right? Because that too will pass. Through death, through change, through disease, through growth, it will also change, right? The more we have, the more we have to lose, right? And so you can see the connection as well between pain and pleasure, right? Within pleasure is pain, within pain is pleasure, right? It's pleasurable to have nothing, to lose, right? It's a very comfortable feeling, right? I remember enjoying climbing trees as a young person, and when I got a little older, I said, you know, I'm sick of being told you're dirtying your nice clothes. I'm sick of it. So I'm going to get all my clothes from a thrift store. I'll pay nothing for them. They're nothing special. And then I can do whatever I want. I can go play in the stream. I can go climb any tree I want. I can, if I want to do some work, and I would say, oh, I'll go do some work right now. It doesn't matter, right? These are not special, expensive clothes, right? And then my girlfriend, a Lazaris friend, said that's no. You've got to spend money on nice clothes. I want you to have nice clothes, right? And I said, well, you know, I don't want to be a slave to my clothes, and I'm not, right? So, but she said, okay, I will buy you nice clothes. I said, but I don't want to hear that I'm ruining them, right? Well, that was, you know, she was attached to that. She didn't want me to ruin the nice clothes, right? But even more, she didn't want me to not look cool, right? So, right, she finally said, 50% truthfully, that she would just buy more nice clothes for me and wouldn't say anything if I got them dirty or ruined. She'd just buy more. And that way she'd get to have me in nice clothes and I wouldn't worry about them. And she said she wouldn't worry about them, right? But the reality is, right, I'd have to remind her, hey, I don't want to hear that we can't do this because I'm in these clothes. This is fun, right? And so there's a price for nice clothes, right? And there's a price for cheap clothes. But there's pain and pleasure inside each one, right? It's the same with a car, right? You get a Lamborghini where, you know, oh, the kids are playing their football next to the Lamborghini. Get away from that car, right? So now you're a slave to the Lamborghini. Or you could have a beat-up Corolla. Whatever, enjoy yourselves. If you kick the car, don't worry about it. It's got tons of bumps and scratches, right? So if we look closely at reality, we will find pleasure in every pain. We will find pain in every pleasure. We will see that the cycle of pain and pleasure is different with each thing, right? An ear of corn has a 1-year cycle, right? Planting rice can have a 4-year, you know, a 4-month cycle in certain countries, right? The sun has a daily cycle. Now that cycle will be up and down, pleasure and pain, up and down, pleasure and pain. But because they're connected, the more we understand cycles, the more when you get up at 5 a.m. to go for a run, you think, no, this is what I need to do to eat pizza and not become diabetic, right? I love pizza. It feels good until it feels bad. I hate running. It feels bad until it feels good, right? But if we understand the connectivity, like, yes, training 8 hours a day to be in the Olympics feels bad. Not having a boyfriend because you're busy training for the Olympics feels bad. Getting the gold medal feels good, right? Beating the quarter-mile record feels good. Getting a scholarship feels good. Right? So, reality is circular. All things are not the polarities they pretend to be, right? Before there is language, there is one, there is the whole, there is the totality, there is all that is. It is unconscious, it's totally connected, it's everything, it's nothing, it's one. We can't relate, the human mind cannot relate to all that is as all that is. You ask someone how they're feeling and they say everything. Get more detail. Which is it? Right? Cut it into pieces. Right? We can't relate to all that is. And so we create a line, a lie, an illusion, a division. We say that this is up and this is down. As soon as we say that, we've got an infinite continuum between the two. And we've got consciousness. Are you 2 degrees up or 4 degrees up? You've got awareness, right, of division. But this is the awareness constructed from the illusion of language. The truth is, up doesn't exist without down, and so how can you call them different words? If the hand does not exist without the heart, how can you say this is a hand as if it's a separate thing, rather than that this is a heart, hand, species, earth, body, universe? Because the earth doesn't exist without a universe. Take away the universe, there's no earth. So how can you say there's a word for universe and there's a word for earth if one cannot exist without the other? How can you say that? Well, it's easy. You create lies called words that are based on the illusionary partition of the ecological whole into boxes that reference other boxes. What, this box isn't real. Yes, it is. This box and this box and this box and this box says it is. Well, they're not real either. Yes, they are. This real box is this and this and this, right? Language is an illusionary series of self-referential boxes that make no sense. You say this is a hand. What's a hand? Well, it's 5 pointy things with fingers. And you say that's not a heart? No, it's not a heart. So how do you move those fingers? Oh, by blood. And where does that come from? It was from the heart. So you can't have a hand without a heart. So why do you say it's separate from the heart if it can't even exist without the heart? You say, okay, fine, it's all one body. Fine, it's one body. And this body is separate from the soil over there, separate from that body? How? Well, it's a separate body. So the body could exist if there were no carrots, there were no things coming from that place over there. There was no water, there was no air, it's its own thing? No, it depends. Like a hand needs a heart, a body needs air, and a body needs... So why are you saying it's separate from what it depends on if it doesn't exist without water? How can you pretend that water's over here and the body is here? That's not real. There's a loop between this body and this water, and there's a loop between this body and this air, and there's a loop between this generation and the next, and there's a loop between this planet and the sun. There's a loop that connects everything. But we think through the illusionary lens of words. It is impossible to think a single thought without words. It is impossible to define words without other words. It is impossible to have words without illusionary lines that cut things in arbitrary ways. Why doesn't a hand come down to here since it's all connected? Well, somebody decided they wanted a partition here. Is there a partition here? If you cut this off, does it still? No, it doesn't. So why isn't this called a hand? We didn't feel like it. We just made it up. Right. So all thoughts rest on the foundation of words, which have zero basis in reality, except for the self-referential support of other words, which have zero basis in reality. And that's the entirety of our human consciousness. There's nothing you can tell me about your consciousness without words, and they're all lies, right? So we say, oh, there's pleasure, there's pain. It's not real. It's an illusion, right? We say there's us and then there's Lazaris. It's not real. There's a little bit of us in Lazaris, and there's a little bit of Lazaris in us, and certainly you can't have the relationship without both. Right? You can't have a relay of energy without two imaginary points that don't actually exist. Right? And then we have the trouble at the deeper levels of physics that the point becomes the wave and the wave becomes the point, just depending on what you're looking for. Right? So within the illusionary language of geometry, the sphere, the circle is the most relevant way to understand all that is. And yet wherever we are on the sphere, it stretches out equally in all directions. Wherever we are on the sphere, it stretches out equally in all directions. And at some point when you fly east long enough, you start, right? If you set out east on a plane and keep flying straight, you arrive from the west back where you began, because reality is circular. If you set out, right? If you set out to prove that thinking is the most noble human act and follow your thoughts carefully, they will eventually tell you that the most important thought is that thoughts are not the most important thing, that all these other things are. There's no direction that you can follow that does not eventually either become toxic or lead back to its opposite. So, if all pleasure leads to pain, and all pain leads to pleasure, and they form a loop, if some cycles are 5 minutes and some cycles are 5 years and some are 5 billion years, right? And we feel an incredible amount of depression that is coming now that will lift in 10 years, that will lift in 7 years with an incredible amount of joy, of levity, right? Depending on the time of the cycle. If we are at the center and expanding in a spherical or a spiral direction, as our love gets bigger, our anger will get bigger. As our anger gets bigger and is embraced, our love will get bigger. Right? As our awareness of our cruelty gets louder, so the awareness of our kindness is just around the corner. Right? When you develop the vision to see 1 mile into the north, before you could see half a mile, now you see 1 mile. Well, you turn your gaze and you can see 1 mile to the east, the west, and the south. Right? if I look at my own experience, I would say that half of life is good and half of life is bad. Half of life is expansive, half of life is contracting. Half of life is breathing in, half of life is giving out, half of life is receiving, half of life is giving. When we interrupt that cycle and try to receive more and not give, when we try to inhale more and more, we get sick, right? Because we get attached to one point of the cycle. If we breathe freely, in and out, without judgment and without pause, the bigger we breathe in, the bigger we will breathe out. And there is ease, there is grace, there is the sphere. As soon as we don't want to see this, as soon as I don't want to touch that, as soon as I don't want to give this, right? We have to pause at some point in the cycle. As soon as we pause and take shallow breaths in, we now take shallow breaths out again. We affect the other turn. As soon as we only plant 3 kernels of corn rather than 1,000, right? We only get 3 corn plants. Right? What we give, or what we receive. So, as Jach moves towards death, not apparently living for eternity with longevity and immortality, as Jach moves towards death, Lazaris becomes less available. The more invested you are in the relationship and who I am because of my relationship with Lazaris, the more frightening that is to lose who we are in relay to that focal point. Right? Other people, not so worried about it. Right? People who've never heard of Lazaris, come, go, whatever, that's life. Right? So, Lazaris has painted what I would say is a hype picture of, unimaginable miracles and all of that, which creates within that statement is 2 things. There's the enjoyment, there's the possibility. Maybe there is a world somewhere where people can be famous and the paparazzi isn't interested in bothering them. Meaning the press only comes when you want them to come. Maybe there's such a world. I don't hear any of the famous people saying that that's the way it is, right? I hear them saying you have to be mindful, right? If you want to be Michael Jackson, you're going to have fucking photographs taken of your baby and your eggs, and you're going to ask for autographs, and you can't go shopping at the corner store. That's the reality of, being Michael Jackson. If you want to do that, right? Now, it's wonderful to dissociate from those probability fields, etc., and say, well, it's always a first. Maybe I'll be rich and famous and just nobody will bother me or look at me or anything like that, right? Or I'll be, I won't plant any corn, but thousands of acres of corn will grow in my fields, right? Because, I create the consequences. Like I'm going to do my 33-second technique and I want corn to grow. My success is, that I create the success is I have a nice Sunday afternoon, but the consequence of that success is that thousands of acres of corn are planted. That's what I want. I create my reality, just change my beliefs, right? In the laws of physics, right? I find the belief there. You have to plant corn in order for corn to grow. I don't like that. Right? Tear that up, throw it in the fire. Corn can grow from the 33-second technique without planting any corn. Right? Do it right. I must not have wanted that one enough, but, right? So Lazaris has created the upside, like unlimited possibilities, miracles, dreams, the new age, a new human, the time, the past is ended, this and that, and right? So there's a lot of up energy. That's very exciting, right? I don't have to go to get a degree. I don't have to do, right? I'm going to do this, right? But there's in that the seed of pain, right? So within that excitement, within that possibility, within it, well, let's be open to all possibilities, right? There's also how many Lazaris friends have felt like a failure because it didn't go all up. They didn't just keep breathing in and they breathed out again, right? How many Lazaris friends have felt like a failure because they didn't live anything like that? How many Lazaris friends have hidden their failures and felt lonely because it seemed like a real winner wouldn't have failed like that? How many Lazaris friends feel confused, like I did all the techniques, right? So within pleasure, there is pain, right? The pain of that disappointment, the pain of that frustration. Lazaris says that if you expect more, that only good things will happen. People have apparently got it all wrong. Lazaris says you got it all wrong. You think if you have high expectations and don't meet them, that it feels better. But no. Expectation creates reality. So if you expect a new human being, a world order, or this or that, it's going to create that. And the real pain is, it doesn't really change that at all. But of course it does, right? The confusion, the bitterness, the frustration, that all those things are not happening in any way that feels great. Like, who's excited about having Biden and Trump as the great candidates? That's the choice? That's it? Well, if you expect, right? If you expect, right, politicians to lie and people to want to believe lies and all that, then because you've watched people believe Lazaris' hype, well then, if you bought crystals because your whole neighborhood was going to be all open, well, where's the evidence for that, right? So Trump comes along and promises he's going to bring all the jobs back to America. Oh, good, right? Right. Biden comes along and says he's going to do this and that, right? So what's the difference, right? If you are a gullible culture, right, then whoever tells the biggest promises gets the votes. Oh, I'm going to buy that tape, and I'll have a whole new, I can have a reality where I don't have to plant corn and it just grows, right? It's only $24.99 for that reality. Oh my goodness, right? So, right, so there is a cost, right? I deliberately tell my clients, like I could tell them it's a miracle, right? It's miracles, right? We'll program, we'll work together. And, normally a job like this will take a month, but we could get it done in 2 weeks. Let's go for it, right? And then the third week comes along and what's going wrong, right? Why isn't it, what did we do wrong, right? So normally a job that takes a month, I tell the client it'll be done in 2 months. Then 90% of the time, I'm done early. And sometimes a bunch of weird things happen and it takes all of 2 months. So lowered expectations lead to success because they're referencing the expectations. It's called managing expectations. Why do businesses go bankrupt? Because they expect, right, that the cash flow will come in at the rate of their burn, but they didn't have a basis for those expectations. Well, Lazaris would say, well, the expectation creates the reality. But it didn't, did it, right? This dumb idiot started out with, $10,000 a month in monthly expenses. They signed an overhead, right? And they expected them customers to come in, right? But they desired them to come in. They imagined all these customers coming in, and they didn't, right? And they lost the restaurant because they had to keep paying their bills, but didn't come in, right? So managing expectations is one of the single most important disciplines in success, right? Now, some of my clients will go and work with a competitor that promises that it'll be done in 2 weeks, but those are the idiots who haven't done contracting before, right? So, and, then they don't check references either because it sounds too good to be true. It is too good to be true. They said it'll be done in 2 weeks. If they just called 4 references and says, let's look at your contract date and when was it actually done? Well, then they would have a very good chance of predicting that by looking at the past, and which is still a lot easier than looking at the future, right? If you just, what I tell clients is the past. I say 90% of the last year's work was done early, and it's between 90 and 95%. So you've got a 90% chance that your job will be done early, but this is the agreed date, right? And that's lowering expectations because that works, right? My crew doesn't perform miracles when I shorten the contract date. They do what they do. And then I have a client saying, well, why isn't it done yet? And I say, well, I gave you too high of an expectation, that's why. The truth is, I don't want to work day and night to get your job done in 2 weeks when this is a job that working at a reasonable pace, working 7-8 hours a day, this is what it will take, right? And I'm fine with that, right? So I just shouldn't have told you that. Sorry, right? So Lazaris has hyped expectations through the roof, right? And I think that works for a time because Lazaris has added to that hype, right? So he's added to the hype other things that you create your own reality and that his techniques work. And he's kept much of the group isolated, meaning don't talk about your own personal experiences and all this stuff. And so it seems like everyone else, nobody else is saying anything that, that their reality and, seems like they're all not planting corn and corn must be growing. They're doing all this stuff. Read about this and so-and-so had some results here. Nobody's talking about their failures. But the statistical experience around Lazaris is, right? So with those expectations comes disillusionment, comes cynicism, comes confusion, comes disappointment, comes shame, comes cynicism, comes frustration, right? Comes distrust, right? I felt all of those in response to Lazaris, right? Because meeting Lazaris at a young age and framing what seemed like reasonable expectations as a 14-year-old, rather than looking at my life experience, I gave Lazaris the benefit of the doubt, right? And I gave Lazaris the benefit of the doubt, right, all the way up to the point where I learned that nobody I knew, including Jack, Penny, and Michael, or any staff at Concept Synergy, is creating a reality that I would call miraculous or amazing or this or that, right? It just, no, that's not what I imagined. That's not what I expected. It's not what I desired. It's not the most beautiful, true, and wonderful situation or world, right? And so the up is followed with the down, right? So there is an uplifting, right? When Penny and Michael and I forget his name, but I think is it Dan Brown, Bill Brown. Anyway, he worked at the post office and was enticed to take a pay cut and lose his pension to work for Concept Synergy. And he said they were, they'd talk about, just one day we'd all just leave our bodies, either in a mass suicide or, we'd just all go off into the new age, right? Spaceship would pick us up, something like that. It'd be wonderful. Then who needs a pension? But, right, that was Lazaris and Jach and Penny then, right? Well, who knew that Penny would die overweight from a painkiller overdose with vodka and codeine, and Michael would die with suicide. Right? Who knew? Such high expectations, such low expressions. But there is that they come together, right? The higher your expectations, the more frustrating they will be. Elon Musk has been promising autopilot or full self-driving for 7 years now, right? And no one's working harder than Elon. No one has a more competent team. But those high expectations lead to a deflation in his promises, right? There's something called Elon time. He really believes and he works his ass off and he imagines it and he sees the future, but he's late by 2 to 7 years for different things. And so when he says something big and new, it's deflated by 80%. Like, okay, in 5 to 7 years or 3 or 4 times longer than that, probably we'll give him, and as he proves his track record, it goes up, right? But he's actually hurt by, and grilled constantly, like, why haven't you solved the history of the universe? You said you'd have it by 2021, right? I mean, why? Well, it's hard. Well, so why hasn't anyone else done it, right? So it's not actually helpful to have unprobable expectations, I would say. Now, it can be, right? Elon's shown the other side of that, but when he started Tesla, he said that everyone told him he'd lose all of his money, and he said they were probably right, but it was worth doing anyway, right? This is called the constructive pessimist paradigm. This is when you're very aware of the probability field you're playing in. You go to Vegas, and you don't say, oh, I'm a Lazaris friend. I'm going to really, just wait till I throw those dice with my 33-second technique. No, you go to Vegas. You say there's a 98% chance that I'm going to walk out of here with less money than when I arrived, which means I've got to do different things than 98% of the population. I've got to work smarter and harder than 98% of the people. Those are the odds. And if I think the goal is important enough, I will play those odds, right? So Elon thinks it's important enough to go and make Earth multiplanetary to start a rocket company with a 90% chance of failure. He thinks the goal is worth playing that odds. But, right, he's not expecting, right? He began difficult companies expecting to fail, but working harder than normal to make sure it didn't happen. Right? Understanding that. And that's also Gates's paradigm. It's called constructive pessimism, where you see the worst, you expect it, and you work extra hard to prevent it, as opposed to the positive paradigm where you expect everything to work out, and then you're shocked when it doesn't, and you don't work very hard to do anything about it. Right? Even the constructive optimist is less successful than the constructive pessimist statistically. The constructive pessimist sees everything that can go wrong and works their ass off to see that it doesn't. The constructive optimist sees everything that can go right and works their ass off to see that it goes right, but is blindsided by more shocks and surprises than the constructive optimist or the constructive pessimist. The constructive pessimist gets the best objective results, meaning they're optimistic that it's worth fighting for. They pick important things They know the obstacles and they go for them, right? So I think that there is a dark side and a painful side to Lazaris's hype that equals the benefit of the hype. And I think that that's true with most things, right? You could have, instead of listening to Lazaris's hype, right, you could have listened to doom and gloom, right, which would be in the other direction. My dad did a lot of that. Oh, it's all coming to an end. Right. Now, the truth is, if you work to make things better, whether you believe they're going to go bad or not, if you work to make things better, they get better, statistically speaking. So if you believe things are going to go badly, but I'm going to do my best to make things go good, they will go better than they otherwise would have done. If you believe that things are going to go great and you work to see that they will, whether they go great or not, they will go better than if you did nothing, right? It pivots, right? And the kind of Lazaris says that it pivots on choice and belief. It really pivots on choice, but you can't make the choice you don't believe. Like Elon gave himself a 10 to 20% chance of succeeding with Tesla and SpaceX. Now, he believed there was a 10 to 20% chance of success. And everyone around him thought the odds were less than 1% and said, don't do it, right? All of his friends made videos saying, please. They showed him pictures of rockets blowing up. They showed him all the private money that had, people had lost fortunes and never got anywhere. They basically said, go do an island. You've got a high success ratio there. If you'll go and buy an island and have some concubines, you got that's a no-brainer, right? You'll succeed every time. Right? But if you start a space company and an electric car company, you're going to fail, right? So the action is what it pivots on, but you need enough belief to take the action. There's plenty of success that happens by people that don't think it'll work, meaning they believe this is not going to work, but they do it anyway. And it works, and they're delighted. Like a guy sees a woman, thinks, oh, she'd never be interested in me, but, I'm going to ask anyway. And wow, she just wants to talk and do this, and right, my goodness. So it pivots on action, and belief is usually, if you absolutely believe that horrible things will happen if you do something, and that nothing good will come if you do something, then you're not going to do it. So my pivot, right? My pivot is away from Lazaris hype and towards geometry and probability. And in that hype, what my expectation is that half of reality, half of my life will be considered good, and half of it will be considered bad. And that's about right. About 40% of the time, I'm annoyed, pissed off, impatient. What are they thinking? Right? I'm critical, right? And it's also worth noting that that type of criticism leads to a lot of success. It's like I criticize my crew constantly. I focus on the negatives. I go there, why is that 1 inch off there? Who did that? Why did you do that? That's 1 inch off. So do you not know that that's the way it should be? Do you need a tool? Where's your level? What do you mean you don't know where your level is? So why haven't you asked for a level? So you needed a level and you didn't ask for a level. Well, I've asked you to ask for the tools you need. Get it together. Oh, okay. They go and get a level, right? Get that back in order. Okay, redo that. Now. Right now, do it. Okay, fine. Everything else looks good. Good to go. Good work. Right? Off I go. 40%, right? And then the client isn't annoyed and asking me, why is our patio on level? Why is this, right? Because and I'm looking through their eyes, through a different filter, and I'm looking at all kinds of things that could go wrong and all kinds of things that are going wrong and what to do about it, right? And it's because of that constant intervention and criticism and iteration that, wow, it looks so nice. Wow, it's done early. It's on budget, right? Because of constant criticism. Do that, right? And so it's not fun. It really isn't. It's the miserable part of my work life. So at times I've just said, I'm sick of this negativity. I don't feel like going to the job site today. I don't want to complain. Let's just let them work for a few days, right? Well, I come in 3 days later and there's 3 days worth of mistakes, right? So then there has to be a big dose of criticism. Redo that, do this. Oh, now this is going to take more time to redo because you thought that was, why did you think that was good enough? It's not good enough. Do it again, right? Think, right? Read a book. Get a better tool. Hurry up, right? And then it happens, right? Then it resolves. But, right, all of that criticism and tightness leads to all of the expansion. It's done early. It's done on budget. Company made money. There's a happy client, and then there's work for the crew. Right? I could let them, enjoy themselves, and then there'd be no work for them. They would enjoy themselves immensely doing all kinds of stupid things. And then I'd give them lots of money. Nobody would hire us. I'd have no money to give them, right? So the tightness leads to the expansion, right? Which they always have work, And so that's built in. Lazaris has tried to divorce these cycles. No pain, no gain is a belief, you should, get rid of and all that. Put in any belief you want, right? Watching TV leads to millions of dollars. Put that in your book of belief, right? So I think that a lot of my frustration has come from thinking, well, why am I not getting this up and up reality that Lazaris is talking about? But in fact, right, half of my reality is good and half of it's shitty. And with trauma and PTSD, my mind exaggerates the shitty part, right? Which creates stress and stuff in the body, right? So the reality is about, is about half and half. And the brain tends towards the negative. And I'm doing pretty well in that model to have 60% of my world feel negative and 40% to feel positive, which is what I've considered a suicidal ratio. Like, I should have had one of these up and up realities where, this led to this and more miracles. Should have had that, right? And those Lazaris friends should have had that as well. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with this, right? Lazaris likes the hype. He likes the up, but Lazaris also doesn't integrate his own paradoxes, right? So there's going to be a new age, a new human being. The gates of Sirius are open, he'll say on one tape. But then on another tape, he'll say that negative ego is going to get worse in the coming decades. What? I thought it was the new age. Negative ego is going to get worse in the coming decades because people aren't thinking and feeling as much. And that's getting worse. People are not thinking and feeling as much as they were, 20, 30 years ago. And that's getting worse. So there's going to be a new age with more negative ego than ever before. Lazaris, no, we don't take questions. No. Right, we do the talking. Well, so, right, but obviously, anyway, just like the whole conversations with Jesus and why isn't he coming and all that, these conversations are, in the field. They're in the probability field amongst many Lazaris friends and practitioners, because high expectations that aren't met chronically by the vast majority of Lazaris friends bring up questions, confusion, blah, blah, blah. So my expectation, just looking at physics, looking at geometry, and looking at cycles, is that if I expect half of life to be shitty and half of it to be good, and if I understand that doing shitty stuff, like for the last 4 years, I've had a mission to make money, which hasn't been interesting to me most of the time, but I started a nonprofit called Happiness Data. And so, I knew money wasn't going to make me particularly happy after a certain point. So, I've just been bored with that. But as soon as I had a nonprofit, and I don't want to raise money because I don't enjoy raising money, but making lots of money and donating it to my nonprofit, that's a good reason, right? So I've been in a mission the last 4 years to make money. And so I've donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to my nonprofit. And then I want that to grow. So then I've learned about investing, which again, I wasn't interested in because, as I say, I'm sick of the American obsession with making more and more money. I see it in my clients constantly, right? Most of them shouldn't even be hiring me, right? They want a $100,000 garden makeover. They want a $300,000 garden makeover. And they're going to be just as unhappy as they were after the $300,000 makeover. They think, based on the cult dogma, that their whole life is going to be wonderful. But of course, it isn't. The things that are bothering them, the traumas, the marital disputes, it affects them 10%. If they would do trauma therapy and go scuba diving and take some time off work and bond with their kids and do constellation therapy and blah, 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 well, then they could expect a 50%, increase in well-being. But a $300,000 garden makeover, it's just not correlated to where their pain is. Right? Particularly when they're even more addictive to go to work, make all that money. It doesn't make sense, but that's the American way. And so, I haven't liked that. I've certainly not been interested in making money myself beyond what I want to do, the things I want to do that year, which means I only need to work 3 months a year to do that, right? I need about $100,000 a year to do the things I like to do, and I can do that in 3 months. And so I've just been taking lots of time off. But this nonprofit has pivoted, like, oh gosh, I've got all these projects that I want to do that I think are useful. So then I need to, double, triple my income. So I've been doing that. And it's been painful as fuck, right? Because I'm taking less vacations. I have a bigger crew, so more people to argue with. They all have their ridiculous reasons why they don't do what I ask them to do and don't like to pay for the consequences, right? So I have a bigger crew, more work hours, lower vacation, right? So that's all pain, right? And my pain has gone up for the past 4 years. And with the pain, impatience, irritation, stress, and then there's more client interactions, and then there's a tighter schedule, and so there's also more client conflict because I'm more stressed, and the schedule is more stressed. So I've had to fire a few clients. So basically, my hell has gone up about 70% in order for my income to triple over these past 4 years to make the money for the nonprofit. But now I can retire early, right? So 4 years of hell have accumulated enough of a fund in the retirement, in the combination of the retirement funds plus the nonprofit, that if I then move to a cheap country in Southeast Asia, which I love, then my expenses go down 90% or at least 80%. And then I can do my nonprofit fun things, right? And so pain to well-being, right? And I needed a good enough reason to do that. I knew the cycle, of course, but, I've just been keeping it a gentle cycle, like work for 2 months, go for 2 months vacation, work for 2 months, go for 2 months. That's a 2-month cycle. This is a 4-year cycle, right? This is 4 years of 300% more stress and hell to get 300% more money, all of which goes to the nonprofit, right? So no taxes has to get paid on that. And that was another thing. I didn't want to fund the U.S. government. 80% of what the U.S. government does, I don't agree with. And so making tons of money to pay lots of taxes, it's just not my thing. And so, but that's the cycle, right? And it's leading to a liberation phase, right? Because, once I have this amount invested and appreciating, right, which meant I had to learn all about investing, which meant making lots of mistakes, losing $100,000 here, and right? But, and that's also painful, right? But that's growth, right? So you plant the corn, it's painful, right? But some of it doesn't germinate. That's painful, right? Then you improve your technique. That's painful. You watch over the thing, goddamn grow, right? Finally, you get a good crop, right? That's pleasurable, right? And so that's the cycle. So I'm not sure why I wanted, a Lazaris fantasy of everything getting better and miracles happening for odd reasons and stuff like that. But this brings this understanding of the circle of the cycle that is the foundation of all ecologies and all things. Right? There's a time for love, there's a time for pain, there's a time for peace, there's a time for war. Is that not what we've been experiencing over the last millions of years? And is there not a connection, right, between those various cycles? So I see more and more symmetry, more and more grace in just understanding these things, right? The more you love something, the more attached you will be to it. You're never going to be attached to something you would frankly wish was gone, right? And so if you don't want to be attached, just have people in your life that you despise, and if anything, you'll be attached to them going, right? But if you really, really admire and love all these great people and you want the really best people, right, then, oh gosh, I'm missing them. I wanted to do this with you and you don't want to do it. Oh, it's disappointing, right? So, and I think that there's a point to, like I've noticed in my own greed, right, that sometimes it's better to walk away than be in a relationship with something in greed. Like, oh gosh, this car is so nice. I've got to protect it. I've got to do this. Just walk away from that car, right? And have something that my attention can be on my thoughts, not on the car, right? So, and those are trade-offs, right? So we're back into that cycle, right? I get my freedom of consciousness because I'm not worrying about being stolen from. And I'm not worrying about being stolen from because I'm not creating a pinnacle of luxury that's 1,000 times higher than the person next to me, right? I was doing a nonprofit project in Costa Rica. The neighbors stole shitty stuff within the first week, right? Because my shitty stuff was their great luxury, right? So, relatively speaking, I was up here and they were there, and so they stole my stuff, right? But if I had brought in, even shittier stuff, they wouldn't have bothered stealing it, right? And so, and there is a freedom around that, you know. If I give the crew really nice tools and I see the cement they spill all over it and stuff, I'm furious. They don't care because they're not paying for it, right? Give them a bonus if they keep the tools clean. They don't care about that either, right? So I give them shitty tools, right? Functional tools that can be thrown out when they lose them or break them, and more functional tools, right? Because I don't mind, right? So the symmetry is very deeply woven in every area I examine it, right? The more love, the more fear of loss, right? The more amazing something is, the more attached you are to it. The more attached you are to it, the more suffering. The higher the expectations, the bigger the risk of disappointment and disillusionment, and and all of that. And so, really, this is the center, right? We're dealing with Buddhism and Stoicism in this kind of circular thinking, right? Peace with what is, acceptance with what is. I think Krishnamurti said his secret to loving life was he did not care what happened at all to anyone, anywhere, anytime. And if you want to not care about anyone in your life, or whether they heal from cancer or not, you too can be a Krishnamurti. But there's a price for that too, isn't there? Right? To not care about someone, to not have anyone care about you. You want Krishnamurti on your deathbed, I don't care if he lives or he dies, right? Or do you want someone trying to read through the medical records and find out the best procedure, right? So there's a balance, right? There's a balance. And so what I think makes sense in understanding this is have 25% of my bets be daily, or my cycles be daily, where there's pain that day and there's growth that day. You sweep the floor, it's pain, nice floor, growth. Right? Take out the garbage, pain, no garbage, no smell of garbage, growth, right? Then you have weekly things, and you have monthly things, and you have yearly things, and you have multi-yearly things, then you have lifetime things. And by simply doing pain, right, doing discipline, doing chores, research, reading. I don't want to read this book. I want to read Harry Potter or something, right? But I'm going to have to read this book on 401ks so that I'll have more time to read Harry Potter later, right? And so, there is an innate up and down and cycle that's all in the reality. Now, I'll close with one kind of aspect that transcends this rule, because basically I would just say that there's as much pain, frustration, disappointment, and confusion in Lazaris's hype as there is curiosity, wonder, amazement in Lazaris's hype, right? That there's a benefit and there's a cost to that. Now, Eckhart Tolle sits like this more and more every year, gets fatter every year, because he's always meditating and being invited by rich people out to have fancy dinners, which he didn't have to worry about when he was on a park bench, right, where he probably wouldn't have gotten fat and stooped, right? But bad posture early on, his physiology, the fact that everyone's always trying to take him out to dinner, and he obviously likes food, well, right? So there's benefit to that success, and there's also, that. So that's part of the loop of kind of cause and effect, up and down. It's just part of the cycles of energy in life. However, Eckhart Tolle enjoys his presence and enjoys being present to life and other people 1,000 times more than the average person, and doesn't fight his fat, doesn't fight his kind of body posture getting worse over the years, and has done a remarkable job of transcending through presence all of the suffering that, going to Eckhart Tolle does not help improve your life. In some cases, it makes it worse. I mean, people go into debt to go to Eckhart Tolle. They get behind in work. These cycles are just part of life. Transcendence and presence, though, transcends all of this type of dynamic, meaning the thing that I'm excited about and which transcends this limiting cycle, which is always wanting to go towards the average, where things are just okay, where things are the status quo, which means they're not great and they're not bad. And the identity, the ego, the I, and its attachment to avoiding the unknown, which means avoiding change, which means avoiding being out of control, which means maintaining the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that creates the status quo. Right? But that's statistically what has been happening, is happening, and will continue to happen. However, up here is something that's outside the system. It's presence, it's transcendence, it's the transcendent regions of the brain. Even empathy. You open up and you say, oh, I'm so empathic. Okay, you feel everyone's pain a lot more, and you feel their happiness a lot more. But it's a very painful world, so you're going to feel more pain usually as an empath than joy. So being more empathic, right, opens up to pain and pleasure equally. It opens up to what's around you. But transcendence, presence, right, being aware of a wordless part, of a transcendent part of the psyche, the self. Just joy for no reason at all, presence for no reason at all. Right? Gratitude for existence. Gratitude for pain, gratitude for self-pity, gratitude for violence, gratitude for joy, right? Gratitude for the possibility field, the probability field, the reality. See, now we're talking, right? Because now we're able to enjoy the pain and the pleasure, which is the energy going through both stages of the cycle. Now I'm able to enjoy the in-breath and the out-breath. Some people only like spending money, but they don't like making money. Right? But with presence, if you're present when you're making the money, the joy is in the presence. It's not in the cause-effect part of the cycle. And so this is, I think, where the evolution and the magic is going and what really distinguishes people. Not getting so wrapped up in where they are on the cycle. The cycle goes down and the cycle comes up again. Oh, my stocks went down 70%. Yeah, they do that every now and again. And put in a little bit more and they'll go up again, right? Right? Oh, I've got to sell everything now, right? Buy high, sell low. That if if there's a presence to the cycles of things, you're in a place of grace. You don't have attachment to avoiding pain. You know that people are going to die. You know that relationships are going to break up. You know that people are going to get sick. You know that they're going to lose their dog. They're going to lose their child. They're going to lose this. They're going to be confused. They're going to get an insight. Then they're going to be confused. Then they're going to get an insight, right? You understand the cycles. You can enjoy the cycle itself, bicycling, right? The shadow is now exposed. Now the shadow is hidden. The shadow is now exposed. Now the shadow is hidden. Now I feel angry. Now I feel hate. Now I feel love. Now I feel relieved. What a wonderful thing to be aware of. The cinema goes by. The cinema goes by. I am the witness. I am the one. Right? Life is. Reality is. I am here. Life is here. I'm part of it all. Right? This is a point of tremendous grace, and it's my view. Take care.